Have you ever just stopped and thought about that feeling? The feeling that you are the one in charge of your actions. Like, what actually makes you feel like you're deciding to reach for that coffee cup or say what you're about to say, or maybe you've even had a moment where you sort of questioned that feeling, that sense of control.
Yeah, that's a really fundamental feeling, isn't it? That conviction that your actions and, well, their results are actually driven by you. That's exactly the territory we're exploring today. It's this fascinating aspect of being human called the sense of agency.
Exactly. The sense of agency. And look, this isn't just some abstract philosophical idea, right?
Yeah.
It's really at the heart of how we experience ourselves as individuals, how we connect, how we interact in social situations, and increasingly, I think, how we relate to all the technology that surrounds us now. So we're going to dive deep into what actually creates that feeling, that sense of being in the driver's seat of our own lives.
We will. We'll be looking at the, frankly, incredible processes your brain uses to link your intentions to your physical movements. It's quite something. And we'll touch on that intriguing concept of we agency, what happens when we collaborate, and also, yes, some of the maybe surprising ways that artificial intelligence is starting to challenge our sort of ingrained sense of control.
Okay, right. So let's really unpack this first bit. When we talk about this sense of agency, what are we really getting at? What's the core idea?
Okay, so at its most basic level, the sense of agency is simply your feeling of being in control. Control over your own actions and, crucially, the outcomes that follow from them. Think of like the crior, the critical sync your brain makes between your inner thoughts, your plans, your decisions, and what you actually do in the world. It's that internal confirmation that, yep, I started that and I caused that result feeling. And this involves some pretty complex brain processes, linking intentions to movements and then tracking the outcomes.
It seems so basic when you say it, like almost automatic, right? But when you stop and actually consider it, it's such a fundamental part of how we perceive ourselves, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a real cornerstone of our self-awareness, of our sense of self, and it goes beyond just the individual level. It's
Hmm.
essential for navigating our social world, too. When we experience agency, we understand our actions have consequences, that they impact others, and that's obviously crucial for any kind of social interaction.
Okay, and you mentioned technology. How does this sense of agency play out when we're, say, interacting with our phones or maybe even AI?
Right. Well, as our interactions with increasingly sophisticated tech become more common, our sense of agency can be, well, it can be extended in some ways, but sometimes it can feel a bit diminished too. Think about giving a voice command to a smart speaker. Do you fully feel like you controlled the outcome, or did the machine?
Good point.
Or, when an algorithm on social media subtly shapes the news, you see how does that affect your feeling of agency over your own information intake? Exploring this helps us understand our kind of evolving relationship with these really powerful tools.
Now, this idea you mentioned earlier, we agency, that sounds fascinating. How is that different from just my personal sense of agency, when I'm doing something by myself?
Right. So individual agency, like we said, is that direct feeling, I did this. Simple enough. We agency explores the idea that when people collaborate effectively, really work together towards a shared goal, their individual senses of agency might in some way merge or become integrated, or at least strongly aligned. The focus shifts, you see, from I achieved this to a more collective, we achieved this.
Ah, so like that feeling a great sports team has after a brilliant play. Everyone feels they contributed, that they did it together.
That's a really good analogy, actually. Yes.
Mhm.
And look, the exact nature of we agency is still a topic of ongoing research. People are still figuring out if it's a truly distinct phenomenon or just, individuals coordinating really well. But that feeling of shared intention, of collective success, that definitely influences motivation and how well a group performs. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, so even if the jury's still out on whether it's a completely separate thing, understanding how we sync up our actions and get that shared sense of accomplishment is still vital for understanding teamwork, collaboration, all that stuff.
Precisely. Whether you call it a distinct we agency or just a highly coordinated form of individual agency within a group, examining it helps us grasp the complexities of how humans manage to work together and achieve common goals. It's fundamental to society.
You also mentioned that there are two different aspects to agency, the feeling of agency and the judgment of agency. Can you break down the difference between those for us?
Yes, this is a really helpful distinction to make. So the feeling of agency, often just called FOA, is a very basic, almost immediate sensation. It's that feeling of being in control of your own body and the direct sensory results of your movements. Crucially, it's what we call a pre-reflective experience. It happens largely without conscious thought.
Pre-reflective. Okay, so it's more like an automatic bodily sensation. Kind of happens before you even think about it.
Exactly that. It's very closely linked to your sensory motor systems, the parts of your brain dealing with movement and sensation. On the other hand, you have the judgment of agency, or JOA. Now, this is a more complex process. It involves a deliberate, thought-out assessment. You're judging whether you were actually the cause of a particular outcome or event. This engages higher-level cognitive processes, reasoning, memory, evaluation.
Okay, can you maybe give us a clear example, something that really highlights the difference?
Sure, let's think. Imagine you're reaching out to flick a light switch.
Right.
The immediate sensation of your arm moving, your fingers making contact with the switch. That raw feeling of controlling the movement, that's the feeling of agency, the FOA.
Oh,
You directly sense you're controlling your body.
got it.
Now, let's say the light flickers and then goes out. The judgment of agency, the JOA, kicks in. You start thinking, okay, wait, did I press the switch right? Is there maybe a power cut? Did someone else just flip the main breaker downstairs? That's your mind actively evaluating whether your specific action caused that specific result, the light going out.
Ah, okay, that makes perfect sense now. So the feeling is that immediate, almost gut level awareness of my body doing something. And the judgment is the more reasoned, maybe slightly later evaluation. Was that really me who caused that?
Precisely. FOA tends to be automatic, right in the moment. JOA is often more deliberate, more reflective, looking back even just milliseconds later to assess cause and effect.
Right. Now, how do fields like neuroscience and psychology help us dig into these two aspects? You mentioned some interesting phenomena earlier that shed light on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Neuroscience and psychology offer some really valuable insights here. Two key concepts that come up a lot are intentional binding and sensory attenuation. Intentional binding is fascinating.
Oh, no.
It's this effect where your brain subtly, unconsciously compresses the perceived time between a voluntary action you take and its immediate result.
Yeah.
So if you consciously decide to press a button and that button press triggers a sound, your brain perceives the press and the sound as happening closer together in time than they actually do objectively.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. This temporal compression, this squishing of time, is thought to be an implicit signal, like an internal marker, that says you were the agent here, you caused that.
That's so cool. It's like our brain gives us a little confirmation by tweaking our perception of time, saying, yep, you did that.
That's a great way to put it. It's an automatic, unconscious process, but it seems to reinforce our feeling of being in control, our FOA.
Okay, okay. And what about the other one? Sensory attenuation. That sounds like something's being turned down.
That's pretty much the idea, yeah, but specifically for sensations caused by our own actions. Sensory attenuation is the phenomenon where sensations that you produce yourself through your own movements actually feel less intense than identical sensations that are caused by something external. The classic example, which we kind of touched on, is that you can't really tickle yourself effectively.
Right. I've always wondered about that.
Your own touch just doesn't have the same sensory impact as someone else's. Your brain sort of dampens the signal. And this helps your brain differentiate between stuff you initiate and stuff happening to you from the outside world. If a sensation is self-produced and feels weaker, your brain essentially tags it as me, helping distinguish your own actions from external events or others' actions.
Right. That makes total sense. So these two things, the time squishing thing, intentional binding, and the self-sensation dampening, sensory attenuation, they're constantly working away in the background, shaping our sense of control, helping us tell self from other, all without us really noticing.
Exactly. These subtle, largely unconscious mechanisms are playing a huge role, constantly shaping our fundamental sense of self and how we interact with everything around us.
Wow. Okay, so this sense of agency, it sounds incredibly important, foundational even. You mentioned earlier it's directly linked to our sense of responsibility. How does that connection work exactly?
The connection is very direct, yes. Our perception of being in control of our actions, that feeling of agency, fundamentally shapes how we understand accountability. I mean, think about it. If you feel like you were the one who chose to do something, the one in control, you're much more likely to accept responsibility for the outcome, right? Whether it's good or bad. This sense of agency is crucial for even just distinguishing our own actions from things that just happen or things others do. And that distinction is obviously necessary before you can even start talking about who is responsible for what.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, if I don't feel like I was the one who caused something, why would I feel responsible for it? It seems obvious when you put it like that.
Precisely. And our legal systems, our social norms, our ethical frameworks, they're largely built on this underlying assumption that, generally speaking, individuals possess a certain degree of control over their actions,
Mm.
that they have agency. So this feeling is therefore a fundamental building block for holding people accountable for their behavior.
But what happens then when someone's sense of agency is, well, reduced or
Right.
compromised? You mentioned things like coercion, maybe certain psychological conditions. How does that impact responsibility?
Right, that's where it gets complicated. When factors like direct coercion or maybe subtle manipulation or certain psychological disorders significantly reduce an individual's feeling of agency, their subjective sense of being in control, it definitely introduces complexities into how we assign responsibility. If someone feels compelled to act against their will, or if their actions feel driven by forces they perceive as completely outside their control, it becomes ethically and often legally challenging to hold them fully accountable in the same way you'd hold someone who acted with a strong, clear sense of agency. Basically, if you lack that fundamental feeling of being the author of your own actions,
Mhm.
taking ownership of the consequences becomes significantly harder, sometimes maybe even impossible.
Yeah. That brings us neatly to a really interesting and very timely point. The impact of artificial intelligence on all this. On our sense of agency, it feels like this is an area where things are changing fast and maybe our sense of control is being challenged in new
Oh,
ways.
absolutely. The rise of sophisticated AI and increasing automation across so many domains, it's fundamentally altering how we experience agency, no question about it. As AI systems get better at performing complex tasks, even making decisions that have significant real-world impact, it naturally raises important questions about human control and oversight. Where does our agency end and the machines begin? There's definitely a valid concern, voiced by many experts, that AI could be designed or implemented in ways that gradually chip away at human control over crucial decisions. And that could potentially lead to a diminished sense of agency for us humans.
That is a bit of a worrying thought, isn't it? The idea of sort of sleepwalking into losing control over decisions that really affect our lives.
It is a significant consideration for sure. And that's why there's a growing emphasis, thankfully, on the importance of designing and implementing AI systems with appropriate safeguards, making sure that humans retain meaningful oversight and control, especially where it really matters most. Research is also looking into how humans actually develop a sense of agency when interacting with new tech. For instance, there are studies where people learn to control a cursor on a screen using really weird, indirect hand movements.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they show how our brains can actually adapt and establish that feeling of, okay, I am doing this, even in these completely unfamiliar digital environments. We learn to feel agency.
That's fascinating that we can actually learn agency in these new artificial scenarios. What about in more complex real world situations where there are tons of factors all influencing things at once? You mentioned the example of expert mountain bikers before.
Yes, the mountain biker example is great because it provides a really insightful look at how a strong sense of agency can actually be maintained, even enhanced, in situations with loads of variables. So, unlike a novice rider who might feel totally overwhelmed just reacting to the trail, skilled mountain bikers are acutely aware of a whole multitude of elements, right? The specific bumps and rocks, the weather, how their bike is handling their own fatigue levels.
Right, they're tracking everything.
Exactly. But this heightened awareness doesn't seem to diminish their feeling of control. Instead, they integrate all these factors into their real-time decision-making. It allows them to navigate incredibly challenging terrain with a strong, adaptive sense of agency. It really shows that expertise, that deep understanding, can actually amplify our feeling of control, even when things are really complex.
That's a brilliant point. So, being more aware of all the influences doesn't automatically mean feeling less in control. For experts, it can actually strengthen it. That's a fantastic takeaway. You also mentioned a case study from psychotherapy.
Yes. There was a case study involving a patient undergoing therapy for bulimia nervosa, and it offers a really powerful illustration of how the sense of agency can be, well, cultivated and strengthened through a therapeutic process. Initially, the patient described feeling completely controlled by the eating disorder. Their sense of agency regarding their thoughts and behaviors around food was incredibly weak. They felt powerless.
Hmm.
But as the therapy progressed, as the patient developed a greater understanding of the underlying issues, learned coping mechanisms, their reported sense of agency gradually increased. By the later stages of recovery, they felt significantly more in control of their responses to triggers, their overall behavior. It really highlights the potential for agency to be regained, to be strengthened through things like increased awareness and understanding.
Wow, that's a really powerful example of someone reclaiming that feeling of control over their own life. That's hopeful. So, looking ahead then, what are some of the perspectives on the future of human agency, especially with AI becoming more and more integrated into, well, everything?
It seems there are some potentially contrasting perspectives emerging. On the one hand, a report from 2022 suggested there's a growing desire among people for more control over various aspects of their lives. People want agency. However, a 2023 survey of technology experts revealed that a pretty significant chunk, about 56%, I think, believe that by the year 2035, AI systems might not be primarily designed with the goal of ensuring easy human control over decisions that are aided by technology.
Wait, so over half of experts think AI might not be designed to keep us easily in control.
That's what the survey suggested, yeah. It implies a potential future where the emphasis in AI design might shift more towards, say, efficiency or autonomy or other factors, perhaps at the expense of our subjective feeling of being in charge.
Hmm. That potential gap between our desire for control and how the tech might actually be developing, that's definitely something we need to pay close attention to, isn't it? So how do we navigate this then? What are the key things, the crucial elements we need to consider to make sure we maintain a healthy sense of agency in a world that's going to be increasingly influenced by AI?
Well, experts in the field consistently emphasize the critical importance of prioritizing several key elements in how we develop and deploy AI. Things like human oversight, making absolutely sure we retain the ability to intervene, to guide, to override AI systems when necessary. Transparency, making the decision-making processes of AI as clear and understandable as possible, not just black boxes. Fairness, ensuring AI systems treat people equitably, which helps foster trust and, importantly, a sense of control over outcomes related to you. And accountability, establishing really clear lines of responsibility for the actions and the consequences of AI systems. Who is accountable when things go wrong?
Okay. So it really boils down to designing AI responsibly, consciously making the effort to keep human agency, human control, human values right at the forefront of development.
Exactly that. The future of human agency in this increasingly AI-shaped world will likely depend on finding a really thoughtful balance. We need to leverage the undeniable benefits of technological advancement while simultaneously safeguarding our fundamental human need to feel like we are, in some meaningful way, the authors of our own actions and the shapers of our own lives.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive, really getting into the weeds of the sense of agency. We've explored its fundamental nature, that crucial distinction between the feeling and the judgment of agency.
The FOA and JOA.
Right, and the neuroscience and psychology behind it, intentional binding, sensory attenuation, its vital link to responsibility.
And of course, the huge questions and opportunities and maybe challenges that arise with the increasing influence of AI.
Yeah. Ultimately, understanding our sense of agency, that core, often unnoticed feeling of, I did that, seems more important than ever as we navigate this increasingly complex and technologically interwoven world.
It really does profoundly shape how we perceive ourselves, how we interact with each other, and definitely how we engage with the incredibly powerful tools we are creating.
So here's maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As AI becomes an even more pervasive, integrated part of our daily existence, how might our fundamental understanding of I did that actually evolve? And what broader implications could that have for our individual sense of self and maybe for society as a whole? It definitely gives you something to think about, maybe even just noticing your own experiences of agency in different situations, especially when you're interacting with different kinds of technology.